It's October 14th, 2019. I'm talking to Mr. Alfred de Zayas about the sentencing that just took place in Spain for the Catalan prisoners there. So welcome to Potkaars. And there's my guest, Mr. Now I'm I'm out of the picture. Hang on, I need to fix my picture.
I see you.
Yeah, I got two cameras. I
see.
So great to have you back here on the show. Just one day ago, you tweeted, "Spain is at war with the rule of law." Here we go. We've had the sentencing in Spain. What did you mean by Spain is at war, and with whom?
It is at war with the concept of legality, with the concept of legitimacy. It is at war with Article 1 of the UN Charter, with Article 1 of the UN Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, with the whole doctrine of the right of self-determination, with the whole doctrine of the right to freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of association, participation in public affairs, etc., etc. Here, you know that I was secretary of the Human Rights Committee, and I was also the chief of the communications department, meaning the petitions department, where all the communications came in. So I was the registrar, and I wrote a book on the jurisprudence of the Human Rights Committee. It's quite clear that what has happened is a corruption of law. This makes me think of Nelson Mandela. This makes me think of apartheid, the apartheid courts, the arbitrary detention of all those human rights defenders in South Africa for decades. Now, Spain is a member of the European Union. Spain is bound by the three pillars of the European Union, being democracy, rule of law, and human rights. It is bound by Article 2 of the Treaty of Lisbon. So what must happen now is that the European Commission must send this on to an investigation under Article 7 of the Treaty of Lisbon. If the European Commission doesn't do that, it loses all credibility, because it has advanced the case of Poland, where there is a threat to the independence of the judiciary. It has advanced the case of Hungary and sent it on for an Article 7 investigation, and it's kept silent about Spain. That is a scandal of the first degree. Among other things, Spain, that claims to observe human rights, has flouted two opinions of the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. On the 25th and 26th of April of this year, the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention issued very sedate judgments on the situation of the 12 Catalan political prisoners. And I underline the word political prisoners. They are not in jail. They are not suffering arbitrary detention just because they committed some common crime or something like that. Quite the contrary. All of them, whether Junqueras or Bassa or Cuixart, they have insisted always in the entire campaign back in 2017 and before on peaceful means, democratic means. There's nothing more democratic than a referendum. And they were elected democratically in order to carry out a referendum. Now, the working group on arbitrary detention not only found that here there were violations of Articles 1 and 9 and 10 and 14, 19, 21, 22, 25, 26, and 27 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. They went on to say they must be released immediately, number one, and number two, because they have suffered arbitrary detention, they are entitled to compensation. Now, instead of granting compensation, Spain goes on with this kangaroo trial and wants to punish them, wants to make it a point to say anybody who wants self-determination in Catalonia is breaking the law. Now, this is, are we in South Africa in the apartheid years? Are we in Turkey? Are we in so many countries that do not observe the rule of law? Or are we in Europe?
You're genuinely angry. That's what you want.
I am upset, yes, because it is a rebellion against law, is a rebellion against the respect that the Spanish judges should have for us, experts of the Human Rights Council. I mean, there were 5 members of the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention who unanimously said these people are suffering arbitrary detention that is unacceptable. They're political prisoners. They must be released and they must receive compensation. And what has Spain done? Added insult to injury.
You made an explicit example comparing it to South Africa. And at the same time, you're quoting Article 1 of the United Nations. So that Article 1...
it's the article that bases the United Nations on 2 principles, the principle of the sovereign equality of states and the principle of the self-determination of peoples.
And the purpose of the United Nations itself. Now, I've talked to your, I don't know, colleague, let's say colleague, Mr. Nils Meltzer, about another arbitrary detention situation with Julian Assange, and I've talked to you about Julian Assange as well. With Nils Meltzer, I asked him, so what happens then when you talk about arbitrary detention, when the United Nations make that judgment? And he says, well, that's up to the member states. And Great Britain and United States argued, well, we have a different opinion, so you can argue all you like, but we think different about that. Now here we are in Spain, and they would disagree with you. And you were in Amsterdam, in The Hague last week, in The Hague last week, where a 60,000 signature petition was handed to Dutch Parliament, and Dutch parliamentarians there said, well, I don't know if anybody's going to make a point now. We really dare, we dare not, maybe. And do you think, who is going to make Spain, who is going to make the point that this is not an internal affair of Spain?
Well, it is not an internal affair of Spain, since Spain is a member of the United Nations, and since Spain is bound by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that is multilateral treaty. All other states parties to the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights have an interest, have a stake in seeing the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights respected by all member states. Now, it is up to states parties and it's up to governments, members of the European Union, to bring this outrage to the European Court of Justice in Strasbourg, and also to bring it to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. Both the Human Rights and the Luxembourg Court should act on this and clearly condemn the Spanish government for violating its obligations under various treaties. And the International Commission of Jurists here in Geneva just issued a press release, very strongly worded, about the violation of human rights by Spain by virtue of this 450-page judgment. By the way, it is wrong on the law, because the Spanish Constitution provides in Articles 10, paragraph 2, and Article 96, that the Spanish Constitution and Spanish laws must be interpreted in the light of the international human rights treaties that Spain has adhered to, among them the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So there's no escaping Article 1 of the Covenant that says all peoples are entitled to the right of self-determination, and Article 1, Paragraph 3, that states that all states parties are obliged to promote the right of self-determination, not only not to create obstacles to it, but proactively to promote this right.
But we also established, okay, so what we're talking about is the situation with the referendum way back in October 2017, October,
Yep.
November, December. People were put in jail then, like late 2017.
But they've been in jail for over 2 years now.
Exactly. And we've also argued over the past 2 years that these courts should already act proactively. So has the ruling that has taken place past couple of days changed anything there then, or can they continue to ignore it?
Well, it's up to the Spanish judges to realize that this is unacceptable, what has occurred. But the working group on arbitrary detention already determined in 2 of its opinions, Opinion 6, 2019, and Opinion 12, 2019, that the Spanish judiciary is compromised, meaning that it is not independent. It's not only not independent, it's not even the competent court. According to Spanish legislation, the court that should have, if at all, examined the cases of Junqueras and the others would have been the Tribunal de Catalunya, and that is provided for in Spanish law. The judgment of the working group on arbitrary detention is very clear on that point, meaning there is lack of jurisdiction on the part of the National Asamblea Nacional, and is also lack of jurisdiction on the part of the Tribunal Supremo. That has to be, if at all, examined first and foremost by the Catalan tribunals, who are the tribunals with proper competence.
In your assessment, is the Spanish court incompetent, or is this...
has no jurisdiction.
Yeah, but then they should not take on the case. So they consider...
Of course they should not, but it's a political case.
Yeah, that was my question.
It was a political case from day one.
Yeah.
And you have the president at that time of the government, Prime Minister Rajoy, making statements that clearly violated the presumption of innocence. Yeah. And the vice president of Spain at the time actually was reveling and used the language that she congratulated Rajoy for decapitating. She used that word, decapitar, decapitating the leaders of the independence movement. So here you have massive influence on the part of the executive on the tribunal. Also, there are major problems with the way judges are appointed in Spain. There is considerable political influence. For instance, if you are someone who has at some point in your career advocated a referendum or advocated the right of the Catalans to self-determination, you're not going to get promoted. And there was a recent case where a woman judge who clearly should have been promoted to a particular position was denied that promotion specifically because of her political opinions expressed with regard to the independence of Catalonia. There are a number of judges. I went to Barcelona on various occasions. I spoke with judges who have been subjected to penalties, to trials, to mobbing, etc., etc. I spoke with a syndic in Barcelona. I mean, the totalitarian nature of the repression of Catalonia is something we haven't seen in Western Europe for quite a while. I mean, it's something that really reminds you not only of the Franco years, but I don't want to concentrate on that, but it's something that you would have expected, say, of the courts in the German Democratic Republic in East Germany, or the courts in the former Soviet satellite states. So here we have a major challenge, actually, to all Europeans, in particular to the human rights community. I am glad to see, as first, the International Commission of Jurists coming down hard against the verdict, but I hope that Amnesty International, that Human Rights Watch, that the Fédération Internationale de Ligue des Droits de l'Homme, and other of the major human rights organizations will come out and say, sorry, Spain, you got it all wrong.
Yeah, but that something has changed there. So we've seen over the last 2 years that the political arena, like the European Parliament, they dare not have. There are some good parliamentarians doing stuff, but not a majority. It's a very small minority that actually is vocal about this. So the political arena has failed the rule of law over the last 2 years. So my first question is, do you see something changing there now that we have a ruling? But the other question is, we have the separation of power. So, okay, the political arena is not functioning on this dossier the way we expected, but the judiciary might be, because you just mentioned the Association of Judges is making a statement here. So is the juridical part of European Union independent, and do you expect them to take action now?
It has to be brought by the lawyers of the political prisoners. It has to be brought both to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg as a crass violation of Article 2 of the Treaty of Lisbon, and it has to be brought before the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg for violations of a slew of provisions of the European Convention on Human Rights. But what you know, I've written a whole report to the General Assembly in my function as independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. I wrote a report 2014 to the General Assembly on the theory and practice of self-determination, and it includes 15 criteria how to exercise this right of self-determination. Now, that should be used by the courts as an assistance in the analysis of the claims of the Catalan political prisoners. And what shocks me is the language of the judgment of the Spanish court, pages 219 et sec, in which essentially they are negationists. They deny the right of self-determination. They go on say that Kosovo did not create any precedent, that Kosovo was sui generis. Now, please, I mean, that is such a fake argument. It is such a phony argument to say that Kosovo was sui generis. If Kosovo is sui generis, everything is sui generis. The fact is that based on the right of self-determination, and very much applauded by the European Union and by the European Commission, we have many states that owe their existence to the right of self-determination. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Macedonia, Montenegro, Kosovo. Now read the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of the year 2010. That should have played an important role in the decision of the judges. Paragraph 80. Read paragraph 80 of the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. It's very clear that the principle of territorial integrity is inferior to the right of self-determination, and that in UN practice, The principle of territorial integrity can only be used externally. It's a principle that concerns relations among states, but it does not allow to be used internally to deny the jus cogens right of self-determination, which, as I said, is anchored in Article 1 of the UN Charter and Article 1 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
Fair enough. Now, my question was, who is going to make that point to the courts outside of Spain?
Well, I am sure that the lawyers of Junqueras and Cuixart and the others will be appealing the decision. This is going to go definitely to Strasbourg and definitely to Luxembourg. And if the judges are true to their oath, they will have to find against Spain. Otherwise, might as well close up shop, do away with the European Court of Human Rights, because if they fail on this point, they will lose all of their credibility.
How can it be that these basic human rights, these founding principles to United Nations and to European Union, how can 9 people in jail for up to 13 years be the 9 people that have to make that case to the courts? Why cannot that list of countries that you just mentioned that exist because of these rights?
Well, there are pressures, and certainly I will not name them, but there are several European countries that have been betraying those very principles that they applauded in the case of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovenia, Croatia, etc., etc. I mean, there is a very high level of intellectual dishonesty. And I will tell you, as a Dutchman, unfortunately, Meneer Timmermans, it is shocking what he has said with regard to Spain. The cop-out of Timmermans saying that this is an internal affair of Spain. Well, torture is an internal affair of the United States in Guantanamo. Torture is an internal affair of Turkey. Torture is also an internal affair and was an internal affair of South Africa. I mean, please, the rule of law is not just positivism. It's not just the Constitution does not give you a right to demand self-determination. Well, sorry, you're not going to find many constitutions that say, please go ahead and secede. You're not going to find that. You have to test it on a case-by-case basis, and you have to then do a weighing of rights and obligations and see how you solve this in a peaceful way. That's where the United Nations comes in. That's where the United Nations should be doing mediation. That's where the United Nations should say, look, Catalans, and look, Madrid, you have to sit together and sort it out. And we will support you in sorting it out. And if you want to have a referendum, then we, the United Nations, will organize it and monitor it the same as the United Nations organized and monitored the referenda in Ethiopia, Eritrea, in Timor-Leste, in Sudan. The problem with the United Nations is that it works rather slowly, and it's always limping after the events. I mean, these...
That's by choice, is it not?
How's that?
That is by choice, is it not?
Well, the United Nations is the states.
It is the states, yes.
That sit in the General Assembly. If you don't have a leader who tables a resolution and say, let's have a referendum in Catalonia, let's help the Catalans in their aspiration to self-determination. And of course, it's not only the Catalans. I mean, you have the Tamils of Sri Lanka. You have the Sahrawis of Western Sahara. You have the Corsicans in France. You have the Quebecois. You have the Scottish in the United Kingdom. Now, let's see what happens with Scotland now, because the United Kingdom, of course, and thanks be to God, never dreamt for a second to intimidate, persecute, prosecute, throw in jail the independence movement of Scotland. Neither did Canada in the case of the Quebec independence.
Exactly. So there is good precedent for that. But the same United Nations is torturing Julian Assange, and that has been established by United Nations as well. So
yes.
With regards to Mr. Timmermans that you just mentioned, as a Dutchman, I don't feel obliged to defend that man and his actions, because in your...
Hold it, I have a call that I'll probably have to say later. Hello? C'est pas maintenant, je suis en train de donner an interview.
So
okay, I'm back.
Yeah, United Nations may be toothless, at least to act on a shorter time scale. Fair enough. We have the Security Council. That thing does something sometimes, but that's not what we're talking about here. But European Union is not toothless. We built the European Union to have a European Commission, and that thing is the most powerful thing that we have in European Union.
Yeah, but the European Commission has failed miserably, and it's applying double standards. That's why I'm saying the European Union, the European Commission, the European Parliament are at risk of losing all of their credibility.
So
you simply cannot use double standards. You cannot present a case under Article 7 of the Treaty of Lisbon against Poland because of a threat to the rule of law, when the rule of law is already broken in Spain. You cannot bring a case against Hungary because of something, the possible lack of judicial independence in Hungary or whatever, when that you have the proof of it in Spain, and you also have the proof of the intransigence of the Spanish judges and of the Spanish government to pay any attention to the opinions issued by the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention and by, my own, when I was the independent expert. I transmitted many complaints to the government of Spain. Obviously, Spain did not answer satisfactorily to any of them, and that's why I issued 4 press releases concerning the situation in Catalonia, and I managed to have my colleagues, David Kay, the Special Rapporteur on the right of freedom of expression, and at that time Chiampi, the Special Rapporteur on the right of peaceful assembly and association, joining me in these press releases, urging Spain to observe the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and to release these people and not to continue on this slippery road toward fascism.
You compared what Spain is now doing to South Africa, that had jailed Nelson Mandela, because that's what you're referring to. Now, I'm old, but I'm not old enough for this, so help me here with my memory. But that thing got resolved in South Africa when Nelson Mandela himself, together with de Klerk, do I recall that?
With de Klerk, yeah.
So
well,
those
the government realized, partly because of the United Nations Security Council sanctions imposed on South Africa, de Klerk realized that it was not sustainable, that in the long run, it was not in South Africa's interest to maintain apartheid, because the economy of the country would collapse.
So that
Having made that realization, he decided it is best to shake hands with Nelson Mandela and to release him after 28 years of imprisonment. I mean, that is shocking enough. But Junqueras he has been sitting for 2 years, and now he's gotten 13 more.
Yeah,
so it's so absurd that is happening today, 2017, in Europe. I mean, political prisoners in Europe, this is unheard of. I mean, this reminds me also of Milosevic. I mentioned the case of apartheid and the case of South Africa. But how about the situation in the former Yugoslavia? Now, Milosevic, in 1989, he removed the autonomous status that Kosovo had enjoyed. Now, what was the result of that stupid decision of Milosevic? That the Kosovo Liberation Army emerged, that they had nearly 10 years of fighting in which about 100,000, well, no, I'm wrong. No, those are not the figures. Forget statistics. Remember Benjamin Disraeli, who said there are lies, then there are damn lies, and then there are statistics.
Okay, hang on, let's go
back. Let's not quote anything, but I'm going to say Milosevic's actions and his hubris, his arrogance vis-a-vis Kosovo led directly to Kosovo's secession. And this secession has been recognized by something like 110 states. They're still not a member of the United Nations, but they've had wide international recognition. And I'm saying here, Spain may be putting itself in the position of Milosevic, and maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but a couple of years hence, Spain will appear in the eyes of the world as a totalitarian country. And that, for a member of the European Union, is particularly painful.
So what's the outlook of the feasibility, sustainability of European Union then? That's what we're talking about.
The credibility of the European Union. The European Union has already lost a lot of credibility because of its double standards. And now this absurdity of the judgment of the Spanish Tribunal Supremo is going to force the European Union to take a position. Now, if they take a position and support Spain's totalitarian judgment, basically they have disavowed what they've done in the past with regard to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovenia, Croatia, and Kosovo. So that is, any argument that the Europeans want to make with regard to Kosovo will sound just hollow, will sound phony. You cannot obviously apply double standards in this fashion. And as I say, it should have been fixed by the Spanish judges themselves. I mean, after the Spanish judges got not one but two opinions by the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention that analyzed the situation very much in detail. Huh?
It's a political.
They should have reacted to that, but they seem to be either complete ideologues and completely blind to international law, although their own constitution says that they have to apply Spanish law in the light of international law. They cannot ignore international law. They cannot ignore self-determination. And it just doesn't help to say that self-determination ended with decolonization. That is an absurdity, because it's all too evident that all of the new states that have emerged in the 1990s and in the 2000s, etc., emerged out of self-determination. They did not emerge out of decolonization.
You yourself said that the judges and the process in Spain was politicized. So that means that there has been a conscious decision has been made in Spain to do this kind of a ruling. You put them in jail for up to 13 years.
It's intended to be a threat to all Catalans. Don't you dare ever mention self-determination again. Now, Catalonia, unfortunately, has had a history of repression and oppression from Madrid. And that goes back, although Catalonia has an 800-year history, and they were essentially an autonomous state with relations with countless other states throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and the Habsburg Empire. Everything collapses for Catalonia in the year 1714, after the Treaty of Utrecht, after the first Bourbon king takes over. That was Philip V. And Philip V carried out what I would like to call genocide on Catalonia. He oppressed the Catalans to such a degree and intimidated them to such a degree, mobbed them to such a degree, that has left scars that are not forgotten today. And the amazing thing is that in spite of all the efforts from the central authorities in Madrid to really do away with that Catalan identity is still very much vibrant, is still very much in the hearts of a large proportion of the Catalan people. Of course, people say not all Catalans want independence. Now, I want you to understand, I'm not advocating independence for Catalonia. That's not my business.
Self-determination.
That is exclusively their business. Yeah. But I am defending that absolute human right that they have to express themselves on the issue of self-determination. That is protected by Article 19 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That is protected in the General Comment of the Human Rights Committee, General Comment 34, on the right of self-determination and the right of freedom of expression, so that Spain must decide, is it going to go with its international treaty obligations, or is it going to flout them? And if Spain can flout them with impunity, then we got a problem. We have a problem of...
well, that's where we are now. I mean, that's what they are doing. And unless those treaties grow teeth, nothing's going to change, is there?
Well, I would like to see some European country relying on the opinions of the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention and relying on the statement just issued by the International Commission of Jurists, say, sorry, Spain, you are out of order, and this will not be tolerated, and we will have the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg determine that a violation, and a serious violation, of Article 2 of the Treaty of Lisbon has taken place.
Yeah. Now, these people in Spain, 9 of them have been convicted now to long prison sentenced to long sentence. This was a high court in Spain. Now, the way I understand it, you need to go through your local Spanish courts until you can appeal on the European ones. Was this the highest one, or do they need to appeal still in Spain before they can make an appeal in Europe?
I believe, and now don't quote me on this because I'm not an expert on Spanish law, but I do think that there is a higher instance, meaning the Constitutional Court. Now, I would have to discuss this with Ben Emerson. Ben Emerson, my colleague and friend, he was the rapporteur on human rights while combating terrorism. And by the way, he's someone who very much condemns or rejects the Spanish attempt to defame peaceful advocates of self-determination as terrorists. I mean, that is a practice that many fascist governments use, or many totalitarian governments use. They don't want to enter into the subject matter and discuss the law. They just simply call you a terrorist. I mean, that is calumniare audacer semper aliquid heret. If somebody calls you a terrorist, The media is going to pick it up. They're going to, again, repeat it ad nauseum. And then in the end, some people believe that there may be some truth to that.
But Spain didn't dare take it that far. I mean, they didn't get convicted for the rebellion charge, did they?
That's right. It was impossible to establish rebellion because rebellion requires violence.
They didn't, yeah.
And there was none of that. As a matter of fact, these Spanish Catalan advocates of self-determination have pursued a strategy of strict, peaceful, and democratic methods. That is admirable. Compare that with the self-determination movements in many other countries. The level of violence of the Kosovo Liberation Army and of militiamen and other people in the Balkans, they were not getting any cooperation from Belgrade, so they took the law into their own hands. Now, does Spain want that? This is a provocation by the judges, because normally you would look up to authority. You would look up to the judges as the protectors of human rights. But when it is the judges themselves who are corrupting human rights, the judges themselves who are corrupting the language, who are redefining the terms. This may remind you of Alice in Wonderland, maybe remind you of the discussion between Alice and Humpty Dumpty, when Humpty Dumpty decides that he can make words mean anything he wants. And that's what the judges are doing. They are redefining the concept of sedition. They are redefining the concept of self-determination to fit their needs. So it's total arbitrariness, which entails, of course, the breakdown of the rule of law. Yeah. So
what's the outlook as you see it for the self-rule of Catalonia in the future?
Well, right now, obviously, let's see what the president of Catalonia, Quim Torras, is going to do. I would imagine that Quim Torras is going to join whatever initiative will bring this to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. But
no one can take.
We have to observe how it evolves and whether there are European parliamentarians who will have the courage to say what has to be said. And I hope that if Timmermans doesn't have the courage to say what has to be said, at least that he says nothing. Because it's quite annoying when Timmermans cops out and says it's an internal affair of Spain. Everything is an internal affair of each country, but it concerns the rest of us, and it has an impact on the rest of us. The moment that you tolerate the persecution of politicians in Europe, you are allowing a very dangerous precedent. And then you're going to have persecution of politicians in France and in Germany and in Italy and in the United Kingdom and maybe even in the Netherlands. So be careful with allowing something as outrageous and as rebellious against the rule of law as this ridiculous judgment of the Supreme Court of Spain.
Yes, and I hold Frans Timmermans responsible for that, and my Prime Minister Mark Rutte as well, because he needs to make a point as well. But the point for the Catalan self-rule that I wanted to make is, now that we have this ruling by Spain, no one in office in Catalonia can, without real immediate danger to themselves, represent the Catalan people anymore. So you cannot. That
is correct. Exactly that is what has happened, and that is exactly what Madrid wanted. They wanted to intimidate these politicians into silence.
So basically Madrid has cancelled self-rule in Catalonia now.
Oh, of course. of course. And well, it did so directly back last year in 2017 in October when it invoked Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution.
Yeah, but this one's worse.
But what they want actually is that you just shut up, that the Catalan independentists just forget about it and be quiet and shut up. It's a little bit like Turkey and the Kurds. I mean, Turkey uses massive power against the Kurds, puts Öcalan in jail, puts the other Kurds in jail, and unfortunately with the connivance of the European Union and of European states that tolerate that and do plenty of business with Turkey. I mean, I think that a comparison with the situation in Turkey and the Kurds is quite relevant in this case. I think the Turks' repression for a century of the Kurds is so contrary to everything in the United Nations Charter and in the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and yet Turkey has gotten away with it, as I said, with the connivance of the European Union. And
that they're even holding European Union hostage by threatening to send the refugees to European Union.
Yes, I know, of course. There's nothing else. It's clear blackmail.
Yeah, blackmail.
It is, yeah. But, I mean, you have to call it by its name.
Now that we have to do that. That's okay. Let's elaborate a little more on that then. So Turkey is invading another country like Syria with guns and shooting people in Syria now.
That was, of course, a massive violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter.
Well, killing people must be
that the Security Council should immediately condemn. But the problem is that you have states, the permanent 5 in the Security Council, that unfortunately connive with Turkey.
Why hasn't this been brought to the Security Council then?
Well, there was a discussion in the Security Council already, but there's been no resolution, and I don't think there will be any resolution on Turkey because the powers that be will put in a veto. Now, I don't.
I would like to see a vote on that and see who vetoes that thing.
Well, me too. And I think we might be surprised who vetoes it. But I have another possibility, another avenue that should be explored. There should be enough states, members of the United Nations, and members of the General Assembly who could table a resolution in the General Assembly requesting the International Court of Justice, pursuant to Article 96 of the United Nations Charter, to issue an advisory opinion on a number of legal questions. And the legal questions would be, what are the consequences of Spain's continued denial of the right of self-determination to the Catalan people? Second question, what is the status of the right of self-determination vis-a-vis the principle of territorial integrity? To what extent the people's right to self-determination must take priority over the principle of territorial integrity? As I said before, the advisory opinion on Kosovo is fairly clear on that, but I would like to see it applied in the Catalan case. And that can be achieved by elevating a pertinent legal question to the International Court of Justice. And then on the basis of that, pressure could be brought to bear on Spain to abide by the opinions of the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, abide by the opinions of the International Commission of Jurors, etc. But part of the problem is also going to be the media. The media in Europe has really become complicit in the violations of human rights by Spain. Either they have not reported on massive violations of human rights by Spain, or they have whitewashed it, or they have covered it up, or they have just given a wrong interpretation of the law. I wrote an article entitled Fake Law, Fake History, Fake Diplomacy, Fake Democracy. And we're in that kind of a situation. The media is selling us fake law, pseudo law. And they're telling us, and I read it in the press, that self-determination doesn't apply. Self-determination was only for decolonization. Now, you know that I've been professor of international law in many countries, in the United States, in Canada, of course here in Switzerland, etc. And if you were my student and you told me that self-determination ended with decolonization, I will flunk you. You will get an F for ignoring that international law by its nature has a progression. International law is not static. It's always been dynamic, and it responds to new treaties, new resolutions, state practice, things that happen. And you cannot make the self-determination of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovenia, Croatia, Kosovo unhappen. It has happened on the basis of this fundamental jus cogens right of self-determination. So if it is applied in the case of Slovenia, that really couldn't rely, say, on a principle of remedial self-determination. Basically, Slovenia had it pretty good in the Yugoslav Federation. So it's not that there were massive violations of human rights by Serbia against Slovenia. It wasn't like that. The Slovenes decided, we are Slovenes, and we want to be by ourselves. We want to be independent from this union. And they were allowed to leave.
So, well, maybe the validity of European Union and United Nations is only proven when these human rights are put to the test. That's what's happening now. So let's see what happens if they stand up to the test, because that's what this is. Yeah, thank you. So you are still a teacher, maybe not in class, but you've taught me again and my audience.
Well, I taught this morning.
Well, okay, thank you. And yeah, I know. I was aware of that actually. And also, I suppose you've taught something to the Spanish judges here, who I'm sure will take note of this as well. Just to wrap up, Oriol Junqueras, and I'm pronouncing it wrong probably. He was the vice president of Catalonia, 13 years sentence. Jordi Cuixart, he was president of a cultural
association. Absolutely absurd. Yes.
9 years.
Look, what does the UNESCO say about this? You know that there is the UNESCO Convention on the promotion and preservation of intangible cultural heritage. That is what Cuixart was doing. That is what his organization was doing. He was doing very much the work of UNESCO, very much the work of the United Nations. And that is an obligation of Spain as a member of UNESCO to promote the flowering of this very unique Catalan culture rather than trying to crush it. So it is in many ways a rebellion against international law, what the Spanish judges had just put on the table. It is a revolt against common sense. It is a revolt against the pillars of the European Union, And now, as I say, the ball is in Brussels court. It is now for Brussels to say, Spain, you've gone much too far. This is simply not acceptable. And let's see what in the next weeks follows and what goes to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg.
Mr. Alfred de Zayas, thank you for being on Potkaars again and teaching us here. All the best, and we will talk again about this.
I guess so, because this is going to evolve in the next few days. Yes. Okay.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks again.
Take care.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make.
You think I'm joking? Predator drones. You will never see it coming.
Laat staan dat ik kan ingaan over vuur.